I hope you have your thinking caps on. We're going to be doing math today. Whether it's the trade deadline for you or the days that follow it, what we're going to talk about in this video is relevant to the Toronto Raptors no matter what. Now, I'm a fallible guy, so if you see anything in this video that simply doesn't add up or I've missed something, please tell us all in the comments so that I can update that and inform everyone. Because really, at the end of the day, I'm trying to inform myself, and you guys are a great resource for me, as are other content creators and NBA insiders and, of course, sports networks. Now, in episode 1, we got rid of some hogwash. We got some red sauce off of us. And the red sauce that we rinsed off, it came from the idea that culture would be improved by taking away a player like Fred VanVleet or Pascal Siakam or OG. And that idea is ridiculous unless you bring in another ring bearer. I think it also highlighted the idea that we need to have faith in the Messiah. So we're going to operate under the idea that Messiah has the best interests of the team at heart, and that the goal is a championship. They want to win. Now, all of the math that we're about to do centers around two main contracts. It doesn't matter whether you're watching this video before the trade deadline ends or after it. There's two contracts on the Raptors that are going to affect the future of the franchise, if not the NBA. Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. both have player options for next year, and there is red sauce flying around, in my opinion, that we have to inevitably part with one or both of those players because we will not want to spend the money on them. The reason I can tell you that's immediately partial red sauce is because we want to maintain our cap position relative to the luxury tax, not just this year, but next. So let's get into the math. I made us a little math song.
Move. Learning addiction is really cool.
So ladies and gentlemen, help me with my next segment, what to expect when you're expecting a Raptors trade. Yes, you see what I did there. The goal here is to dispel the rumor that we need to move one or both of Fred and Gary. Now, some of you are savvy and you're going to say, but Gubs, it's not just Gary and Fred's contract, it's also potentially OG. He's rumored to move as well, and they even say he's disgruntled. I think that's BS. OG is promised money 2 years from now. I'm going to show you also that there's probably money in the pipeline for him as well. So everyone get out your calculators. I have mine. And if I do anything incorrectly, again, in the comments, make sure you update us. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying a trade will not happen with one of these players. What I'm saying is there's other avenues. We're going to take a look at those. Here's the money talk. As you can see, Fred's at 21.25. Gary's at 17.505. Next year, they'll decline these two. It would shock anyone if they just simply accepted, okay? They're both playing reasonable enough basketball. Some other team is going to be willing to pay them more than what they're promised for next year. So they're both anticipated to say, I'm going to decline my contract. Now, the Raptors have bird rights on both players, so we can afford to pay them more than any other team, which opens up the possibility of what we did with Kalo. But we need the right partner. Who is the right partner? Well, the perfect partner is a partner that doesn't want to pay the Raptors price this year, but if they go through the playoffs this year and they needed a point guard like Fred VanVleet to put them over the top, or a Gary Trent Jr., or an OG for that matter, they might be willing to pay the price next year. So there is a scenario where the Raptors might pay both of those players, do so and exceed the luxury tax threshold next year potentially, in order to hang on to those assets and get a greater return with a team that didn't value them right now at the deadline, but might value them more after they experience the playoffs and wish they had a player like one of those two. So that's a scenario that's really, really important to think about. It's especially important for those of you who don't feel that the Raptors have a team that can win a Larry with the present roster construction. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, the top brass might agree with you. but they might see a path where they're going to have to spend more money and enter the luxury tax threshold, exceeding it, in order to win the Larry. So this might be an opportunity, because we have bird rights on Gary and Fred, to purposely exceed the cap by keeping one or both of these players, even though our eventual plan might be to trade one of those players later for another player we feel is the right piece. So we've established that the Raptors could enter the luxury tax to keep any combination of these players because they have bird rights on them. The question is, could they keep Gary and Fred without exceeding the luxury tax threshold? Because that's where they've purposely positioned themselves the last couple years. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so a quick Google search tells us that the salary cap luxury tax threshold for next season is likely to be 162 million. And that's where the Raptors like to hit. So we want to see if Fred and Gary can come in under that number. So we're going to combine this, because we're not worried about this year in this scenario. We're worried about next, right? Can we keep them and use them even if we don't think they're the player for the future? We could use them to exceed the cap and get that future player using that money, okay? So we can go after a high-priced player. So let's take off this 145 million minus 145,798,719. So that means we would have, if we didn't give anyone any raises, we'll enter, assuming we keep all the other players, okay, that are on the contract sheet right now, not going to worry about taking them off, we'd have around 16 million for raises for them, but we actually have more, because we can add on to this Fred and Gary's current contracts. Rather than calculate just their raises, let's take off their current salary. So Gary is 17, and this is adding it to our available cash to keep us in line with the luxury tax threshold. There we go. Plus again, Fred, and that's 21,250 with some zeros again. So as you can see, we have roughly 55 million to look at retaining these two players by next season. So this would be like if we wanted to do sign-in trades or actually just keep them on the roster for another year of development. Now, if you want to do extra math for me, you could try and earmark some money for OG and Pascal here and project what the salary cap luxury tax threshold is going to go up to in 2024, 2025, because at that point, we need to give the OG raise and a Pascal raise and some other major names on this list if you scroll down it. That'll include Precious, Malachi, the list goes on here. So you can do more math if you want. I'm going to stick to just this next year and work with this 54 million or 55 million for Fred and Gary and see if it's possible to stay under the luxury tax threshold. So what is Fred seeking? Now, I'll let you do your own research. The numbers that I'm seeing, depending on what I bring up for articles here, he just switched agents, Freddie. Anticipation for a new payday. Depending on who you read, most high estimates have him wanting somewhere in the realm of $30 million. So let's just take that off of our calculator thing, our budget here. So let's take off 30 million for Fred. That would mean that we need Gary for 24 or 23 or 22 to leave a bit of a cushion and still remain under the luxury tax threshold next year. Again, assuming there's no other major raises on our roster. This means that as long as Fred is seeking 30 million or less and Gary is seeking, let's call it 24 or less, that's without going into the luxury tax era. This is actually completely feasible. All of this, the trade rumors, the Toronto must trade because they're not performing well enough and they have these assets that need to be renewed. All of this is hype. None of it is necessary. In fact, if the franchise senses that it will be entering a luxury tax era in the future, it is wise for them to stay positioned around, slightly under ideally, the luxury tax threshold for next year after free agency in this summer. Now, maybe you're scared of entering the luxury tax era. Let me leave you with this. Here are some of the teams that are performing high end in the NBA right now. Big time teams. Notice where their cap is right now and note that each and every one of them is well in excess of the luxury tax threshold now. They are currently in luxury tax eras for their franchises. And I don't even have them all here. I just have some of the really notable ones, I think. So here's Boston, here's Denver, here's Golden State, here's the Clippers, here's Philly, here's Brooklyn. All of them over. You can pause and take a look if you want. And they're over substantially. The one that's not is Memphis. And Memphis will put off going there as long as they can. And if they're smart, they'll stay just below the luxury tax threshold, as we have done for the last few seasons, while they develop their roster. They might see a championship this year, but if they don't, that's how you want to move towards it. If you keep needing pieces, you don't even need the pieces on your roster that you're paying right now to be the ones that hoist the Larry eventually. But you do need to use your bird rights to get past the luxury tax threshold in any scenario. You need exceptions to exceed the salary cap. Again, I invite you to check the math, add to the, please. Like I said, I didn't even investigate further down the line. And trust me, the Toronto front office is thinking years ahead, not just next year like I am. They're thinking way down the line. Everyone will tell you, anyone that has any knowledge of basketball contracts will tell you, the Toronto Raptors have one of the best positioned organizations in terms of malleability, flexibility, and assets. So there you go, guys. We've dispelled some more red sauce. We do not necessarily have to move Fred, Gary, or either one of them if our goal is to position for a future luxury tax era in the future. One that is inevitable if we keep Pascal on the roster and any combination of OG, Fred, and Gary, Precious, you name it. We gotta go there if we want to keep some of this roster intact. That's what you can expect. If you're expecting trades at the deadline, expect that the franchise might actually go in another direction. And maybe they already have acted. Maybe you're watching this after the deadline. I promise you there's clues. So if you're watching this after the deadline, if they have traded any of these players, but not other ones, it's because they are managing future money right now. It does not mean that they necessarily think that the players they're keeping will eventually hoist a Larry on the team. It just means for now, the money's right to position us for later. In the next video, we're gonna explore some of the cookie crumbs that we saw from this season and see how we might be able to predict at least one of the moves that we know the Raptors are looking to make. Cheers, make sure you subscribe and like. I appreciate all your support. Remember, it's all about the Larrys.
It's so noisy that it almost defeats the purpose. And if you guys are trying to make it problems for everybody, there's so much noise that it just like, it's ridiculous. You can't even pay attention to any of it. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it's you guys, but I'm just, in general, it's like so far-fetched that you don't even have to react to it.
Oh!
This is Chef's Kiss approved. Mwah!